we're gonna enjoy the conversation together. Everybody has a story to tell. Everybody has a lot of things for others to learn from also. All right.
I love that philosophy, actually, the whole area of, in the end, our story is all we have.
Yeah, that's it.
That's all there is.
That's all it is, right? So Ben, in our culture, it's very honored if we can have our audience to have you to introduce a little bit about who you are and
Sure.
what you do. Can you do that for us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, look, I'm Ben Kehoe. I'm married to Sally, and we've been married for 47 years. We have 4 adult children, and we have 13 grandchildren. I've grown up in Queensland. I was born in Gympie, and we moved around when I was a bit younger, but I went to boarding school at 14. From there, and I discovered sport in a big way, so I thought my life was going to be as a professional sportsman. But there were people who could see that I wasn't that talented, so I went to university, still thinking that I wanted to play sport all the time. So kind of anything that happened academically at that period of my life was more accidental than real. And so I played a lot of cricket and rugby. And then in my early 20s, kind of got a little flash of insight about the possibilities. So, I mean, in a work sense, I've been a trainer and a management consultant. I've been a social change pioneer in different ways, a change agent, an applied management educator. I think we call them coaches, but I think it's really about helping people just sort out how to manage stuff. And in various stages, I've been a leader in my life. So that's where it is.
Yeah. Well, you summarize your whole career life in less than 2 minutes. Then we need to really dive in to understand more, right? And
Sure.
so let's travel time together, Ben. When I was young, I wanted to become an astronaut. So when I was young in here is when I really, really, really young, right? I wanted to become an astronaut and jump in different planet. But life
Yeah.
didn't give me any opportunity to work or do things that near to what I wanted to become, right? So when you were young, was a little boy, Ben. What was your dream about your future, though?
Look, I grew up in a family where my father was a politician at
Ah,
some stage in his life, and he was also a public servant because he had a challenged political career, and he lost his position in the parliament. It was a very traumatic time, and at various stages, then I thought I would have liked to have been a politician. Somehow I was going to change the world the way that he tried to. But I think having watched the impact it had on him over a period of time, I decided that probably wasn't a path I would take. And excuse me, and ideologically, the political systems didn't kind of fit the sorts of things I believed in, so I became a little bit apolitical, if you like. Also, my mum was one of Queensland's first accountants, so she was always encouraging us, or both my parents, to aspire to go to university. There was never any conversation about anything other than the fact that I would go to university. The notion that I had a dream about professional sport was not theirs. So, effectively, they encouraged me to go to university, and that was the if you like, the family story, about what would happen. And so I finished up going to university.
So you went to the university in what major back then?
In Queensland, in University of Queensland.
And study what?
I started studying arts law.
Ah.
And I finished the arts degree, and that's necessarily enough. I studied politics as part of my arts degree, and I did some law subjects, and wasn't spectacularly successful. A more modest law career you've never seen. And so I went to work in the Crown Law Office in Queensland, or in the public service, because I had no idea what I wanted to do. Even when I was studying law, that wasn't part of anything. So I was a bit of as I reflect now, a bright young man with very few prospects. I couldn't see what I wanted to do at all. And it was kind of, I was in the public service, so that was where you started, you know. I then made the decision not to study law. And that was a big decision because that had been the family story, if you like. And I moved to a government department where I was a research officer. And the area that I was researching in, not because I had any particular competence, because that was just what they did, was what you would call now performance management. But back then it was called workload management. Studying how you would measure how people work so you could allocate resources. So that was in a very early primitive time of what you'd call management information. Management information didn't exist back there as we know it now. You know, a very primitive concept. There were what were called performance statistics. And it worked really hard. You could kind of say, well, you know, if this many files were done, that meant you needed this many people. Or if this many crimes were committed, that meant you need this many policemen. So there was a very simplistic management information system. And so that's where I started, if you like, what became my living passion, you know. And while I was doing that work, I was lucky enough to be picked out, as someone suggested. I was a precocious young man who needed a lot of opportunity. And they gave me that. So they sent me back, this is in 1975, they sent me on a 10-day management development program.
1975.
1975. And I didn't know what management was. I had to look it up in a dictionary. Because back then in the public service, it was all about public administration. Anyway, the management program was conducted by the University of Queensland. And there was 3 from my department, the department I was in. There was the permanent head, the president of the union, and there was me. So I was 25, and these were senior people. And I've gone to this management program called Organisation Development, and our project was to study Organisation and Management Development was the program, I think, and our project was to study performance appraisal linked to the work I'd been doing. You know, how are you going to appraise people in their jobs? It turned out that program, and there was a lot of senior people there, relatively senior. I was physically sick for the first 2 days, just vomiting, because I was so, if you like, overawed by the experience. And it was a pretty profound experience because I'm not sure if you're familiar, but in the early days of the human potential movement, there were things called sensitivity training and encounter groups and a whole range of explorations of human potential learning events. And I was in this sensitivity training group for 6 days. And it was, it's hard to explain, but in the end, it changed my life. In that window of time, I actually had what you might call a cathartic experience or a conversion experience, if you like, and I decided that this was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Wow.
Except I didn't know what it was. So I knew I wanted to do whatever this was.
Wow.
And that set me on a path for life. And I say to people now, since that day, I've never done anything else but that.
Wow.
I'm still trying to work out what it is, you know, like it's morphed through a whole series of different, as I mentioned, different career roles. But that was the time it happened. I can remember falling on the floor, if you like, sobbing, saying, I want to do this for the rest of my life.
Wow.
And these other old people in the group, because I thought they were really old, they were probably in their mid-40s, were just looking at me thinking, this guy's gone, this guy's not quite right, there's something wrong with him.
Ben, I have two questions for that before we move further, all right? So
Yeah.
you went with the head of the department and then the president of the union, and then you only at the age of 25. So there's a lot of people in the department that were senior than you, but you were selected. Did you ask them why you were selected back then for the program?
I did. I asked them, I selected, and part of it was I was a precocious young man that needed to be given a lot of opportunities, because in those days, occasionally I was invited to meetings because I was young, and I was one of the very few university graduates in the department.
Oh.
Back in those days, everyone wasn't a graduate, and I had this arts degree, and precocious was probably a good word for me. I had a view on a lot of things, and I wasn't quiet about that at times. I actually wrote the permanent head a letter about what the department should be doing when I was 25.
Wow.
And he very graciously wrote back to me. And he, a number of times, because of the work I was doing, I had to write papers for if you like, the permanent head. He'd be going out to give speeches and that, and I was in the research branch, so I was just another researcher, and every now and again one of my papers, or I'd get a paper that he wanted researched and I'd write it and go up to him, and I submitted this paper this day, and about a couple of days later I heard the permanent head coming down the hallway saying, "Who wrote this paper?" And it was on some performance issue or workload issue in one of the regions. And, they kind of sniffed around. They thought, oh, well, it was Ben Kehoe. And he said, "Come with me, Mr. Kehoe." And I was shaken. When the permanent head visited the office and asked for you, it was enough to cause your stomach to roll.
Absolutely.
And so he called me down to his office and he said, "Look, I want to explain this to you." He said, "I'm severely embarrassed about this." He said, "You've submitted some information in here that was wrong. So I've gone out in public and said, these are the facts. And in point of fact, the facts were wrong. What I need you to know," first he said, "Where did you get them from?" And I said, "Well, I got them from the computer printouts." And the computer printouts in those days they came in big square pages, and you tore the edges off them, and then you had to read all this data. And I just reported what was in the printouts into my report. And he said, "Look," he said, "what I need you to understand, Mr. Kehoe, is that if you put garbage into the system, garbage comes out. So anytime you write a paper for me, I want you to go back and check the raw data." Now, do you hear me? "Yes, sir." And that was all that was ever said. I went back to my office. Every time I wrote a paper for him, I checked the raw data. And he was so gracious about it. I've never forgotten how, while he was cross, and then he got me to do one other project, and I've never forgotten this one because I never understood it. But he called me down to he used to call me down to his office then, because he got to know me, and it wasn't a big headquarters, if you like. He said, "Look, I want you to go down to the state library in Queensland." And everything was manual then, there were card indexes, and "I want you to do some research on a concept called public tranquility." So I'm 25. I mean, it means nothing to me. down there to level research public tranquility, and come back. He said, "Look," he said something like, "You don't need to get an answer. I just want to know what's available in the library about the concept of public tranquility." So away I go. 2 days I spent in the State Library going through card indexes and looking at articles. I came back with 3 pages of notes, and I gave them to him, and we had what you would call, it was disproportionate in its balance, but a conversation about the level of public tranquility in society. And so he had a pretty big influence in how I thought about things then. And as a result of that program that I went, and he was part of the one who sent it on me, he and another colleague in that department, they saw more potential in me than I ever saw in myself. So they kept giving me these opportunities. And I'm so in the end I decided if I was going to use this management and organisation development program, I had to go back, and I went back and studied business, postgraduate business degree.
Wow. Now we go to the moment that you attended the development plan program.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So at the end of the program, you basically realize the aha moment in your life that is something that you love doing, and that you're gonna spend the rest of your life doing that. And that was a very big statement at the age of 25, right? For the person that been looking out for the path of where he wanted to do, for most of his life before that. So how did you know that is the moment? At that moment, that is the work that you're gonna spend the rest of your life with.
Look, the answer is I don't know. I mean, I just knew whatever was happening here was what I wanted to do. I can remember ringing my wife, and he just got engaged to be married. And I rang my wife and there were no mobile phones then. You had to queue up to get onto the single phone in the hotel sort of thing. And I remember saying, I just announced to her I'd changed. And then, of course, she said, "What do you mean? What's that mean? I know exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life. And she thinks I've gone nuts. She's got this random young man who kind of was floating all around the place. All of a sudden, he's got a view of the world. And when I went home, and I can remember thinking with her, and then I can remember announcing to my parents that I'd discovered a thing called interpersonal relations. And my dad just kind of shook his head, didn't know what to say, and not many people did, because this wasn't a common conversation in the world, And I learnt about things called there was a psychological concept back then called transactional analysis, and I learned about job design, and I learned about planning and problem solving, all sorts of management skills, decision making, and a whole range of things. And I came back, and I was just so full of it. If I had the answer, I just didn't know what the question was. And I can remember saying to this guy, if we could only design the work better, design the jobs better, people would be more motivated, and we'd all be more productive, and yada yada yada. And this guy said, "Oh, look," he said, he was an old public servant. He was at least 50, and he said, "Look, listen, Ben," he said, "just settle down." He said, "All of this psychological stuff that you're learning about, in the end, there's only 2 motivators in the bloody world." He said, "There's fear and greed." He said, "And once you understand that," he said, "everything else fits in." And I was like, no, but there's, aspiration, and there's all these other things. And he's saying, "Forget about it. Just fear and greed. Just understand that, and it'll be all good." So, so then I kind of get myself off on my business admin degree, and I start to get a bit of background to this little window of learning I'd had. It's a much bigger world out there. There's things like management, there's finance and marketing and accounting. I knew nothing about any of that. So I worked out that if I was going to get into do this stuff for a living, I had to find another role. And I found a role advertised in the staff development training area. So I was one of the very first training people or staff development people appointed in the Queensland Public Service. There was only a dozen of us at the time. We all just been appointed, and training was just becoming a fashionable concept. So I've been appointed to this role called Staff Development Officer in a department of, 200 or 300 people. Had no idea what I was supposed to do. Absolutely none. But I knew it had something to do with what I'd learnt on this program. So I busily started to try and convince the business leaders in the department, that they needed to run management and supervision programs. And after a little while, they let me run a couple. So I ran back then a couple of management and supervision programs. Now picture this, this is a department that's, got a whole bundle of fairly traditional public servants in it. They've been there for a good chunk of their life. I'm all of 26 by now, and I've tried to convince them that I should be the one who'd run these management and supervision programs.
And what did they say?
They let me run 3.
Wow.
10 people on each program for 4 days, and we ran these management and supervision programs. But I mean, this is in the window of 2 years. So for the rest of the time, the permanent head of that department was very good at it. He said, look, I'd like to interview all of the staff, all 200 or 300 of them, and I want you to sit with me in the interviews and we'll talk about their professional development program. Because people were just starting to become aware that there was such a thing as learning and professional development, and it needed to go on. So that was a big part of my role, what you'd call career counselling now. But so nobody knew about it. There was no books on this stuff. You just kind of learned how to do it.
But then, since that profession is so new back then, in not only in Queensland but everywhere, so how did you figure out the information so that you can absorb and learn so that you can provide it back for the people, though?
Sometimes I just made it up, I've got to say. But I was reading. By this stage, I developed what you'd call a maniacal reading program. I really, because I'd started a business admin degree, so I had access to, if you like, the broad base of reading that you needed to do. I actually continued to. There were, weekend programs and week-long programs, so I continued to personally fund my what you call professional development. So those sensitivity groups and encounter groups, I would have done 20 weekends of training in how to manage groups and how to kind of understand how people learn. And I there's a whole range of other things like therapies that I learned about, Gestalt and psychodrama. So I did a whole range of training in those areas. And it was all in the spirit of understanding how people develop. And this was kind of and one of those weekends actually was a structure, it was an encounter group. And the theme of the encounter group was exactly the question I was trying to answer. It was a bit like, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? So I'm 22. So I go along to this, and the pinnacle question in the weekend as it evolved was, so what's your reason for existence? I'm 26 or 27. I've just got married. As it happened, though, we were just having our first child. So it was all an emotionally charged time. I won't say turbulent, but it was charged. I've been married 12 months. We were having our first child, and people are asking me, what's my reason for existence? And I'm going, oh, shit. So they gave us an hour to go away and walk in the bush and came back. And we all came back, and then everyone in the room had to sit around and talk about what was their reason for existence. And this is all kind of, when you look back on it, there's a pattern to it. But going into it, it was kind of, like punching fog. So I worked out that my reason for existence was to make a difference in people's lives.
Wow.
So and to symbolise that, I picked up 12 pebbles. And as I was going through this is my reasoning, I gave everyone a pebble. I said, this symbolises the difference I'm making in your life. So that was a pretty seminal moment, if you like, when I finally got this flash about it was about making a difference in people's lives. So I was kind of pursuing all these different learning avenues, if you like, and at the same time, my wife and I, in that window of time, we'd been married a couple of years, and there was a thing in the Catholic Church back then, but it was across all the churches, called Marriage Encounter. And Marriage Encounter was a weekend for married couples to go away and to, if you like, just discover who they were and renew their communication skills. And we'd only been married 2 years, so all of the wisdom figures that we knew said, no, you don't want to go and do that. You need to be married 20 or 30 years before you're going to do something like that. But I thought I was smarter than them. And I figured that if you're going to be married for a long time, you ought to do the work now, not wait for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
And one of the things that had occurred to me on the way through, and thankfully I was married to a great woman, she agreed, that you had to prepare for this stuff. You had to actually learn how to be married. So we did this Marriage Encounter weekend, which was, I could only say, stunning. It had the same effect on us as that first group had on me. Because the question they asked at a major point in the weekend is, what's your reason for living? Same question, different day. And what it did for me, among other things, because that was the time when you're thinking about, religion and kids and what are you going to teach kids and, all that stuff. What it allowed me to do was reconcile what was a whole body of secular human potential knowledge, and it opened up the possibility that it was all connected to spirituality. And I'd been brought up a Catholic, and I'm trying to work out, how does all this fit together? How can you have all this stuff out here and you've got all this stuff in the Catholic? Can I be a Catholic and still do this for a living, sort of thing? Now, that's simplistic, but it was kind of, how am I going to reconcile it and stay married? Because a lot of, in the human potential, in that early part of the human potential movement, there was a lot of fractured values occurring, so people were all of a sudden getting these brilliant insights and then deciding they wanted a divorce. The person they married was not the person they loved, sort of thing. Yeah. So there was a whole range of, and I didn't want to be in that category. I wanted to be in the category that did this, but stayed married. And
beautiful.
So the Marriage Encounter weekend was a big, big shift, but that was part of the learning, because what I worked out was all the same stuff. The language was the same. It was about the development of human potential. It was about making a difference in people's lives and in the world, for God's sake. You're going to make a difference in the world if you're going to do this stuff. So that was how it all kind of slowly evolved, even if it was a particularly messy journey, which life is. So I was kind of getting my career together, and I was getting my spirituality thing together. And so that we decided, and it was a choice, that we would remain Catholic. As difficult as some of that environment is, that was the choice we made, and it was kind of an amazingly powerful experience. And then I started to do some reading and studying, and I kept going with finally finished the business degree. But, I just kept hanging in there, buddy, reading and learning. And I started, you're talking about when we had only about 10, training people in the Queensland Post. I started a network.
Ah.
And so there was all these, if you like, lost training people out in the public service. It turned out we'd found about 50 in the end. And every 3 months we had what was called a trainers' day, where people could come together and share their learning, such as our ignorance was. We didn't know what we didn't know, and we were listening to people. And there was a lot of people got into the training profession around that time who'd all come out of the army. So they had a very clear, disciplined, structured way of doing things. And so there were some really good people in that, and that kind of gave us the support in a fairly unstructured way to get things going. So we kind of got this support network happening. And then I got involved in the professional body associated with training in Australia. And I was on the board of that, and I went on to become the national president of that. And that's a whole story in its own right. But, that's where I got a lot of learning. Associating with other people who were doing it, and I'm hearing what they're doing. And then I got another job in the electricity industry in Queensland, and I was in what was career counselling then, working with apprentices and induction programs and a whole range of counselling type areas. And something happened there. I was running an induction program. An induction program, when people join an organisation, they got, a one-day program and there was a session on it called career development. And I talked about, when I was very learned then, I was at least 28, 29. And this young woman said to me, "Mr. Kehoe," she said, "what are your life priorities?" No one had ever asked me a question like that before. And I kind of thought, well, that's a good question. Oh, well, and out of nowhere, meaning I'd done all this work, but out of nowhere I said, well, my faith, my family, and my work, in that order. And that became, if you like, nothing's changed. I'm 73. And I'd have to say that that's been the core of the whole lived experience.
Faith, family, work.
Yeah, I've worked in all of those areas, and I've continued to learn and read, and I've wandered around the territory. In work I studied adult education and the whole range of organisational theory stuff. And Sally and I continue to do a whole range of what you'd call family education programs and community-based education programs. In fact, Sally and I developed and ran one of the first what we call marriage enrichment programs in Queensland. So we put together a little package of programs. Some of them were just off the shelf, and some of them we ran ourselves for couples who were married. Just learning I had this thing about if you were going to be married, you had to work at it.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to be a good anything.
Yep.
It just doesn't happen.
Yep.
There's no excuse for incompetence.
I really love the part that you've been very intentional in what you do, right? Be very, very intentional in making things to happen. So you went to the training program because you want to prepare and learn how to be married for a long time. That's how you and Sally been together for 47 years. So that's all of the groundwork, preparations, and commitments back then. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. I have to say that together we've done the work, But both of our parents were married for over 50 years.
Oh.
So it's not as if we were coming from an unstable base. My mum and dad were married for 56 years, and I think hers were married for 58 years. So, they, in their world, they did it well,
Yep.
And we just did it our way. But yeah, that was all very formative time. All that learning and I remember one of the education. I had the great privilege actually of working with a guy called Malcolm Knowles,
Malcolm.
and professional body I was associated with invited him to Australia. Malcolm wrote the first book in the world on adult learning.
Oh.
So I got to work with him for a week, and it's a bit of a license to say that I worked with him. I actually carried his bags, but I spent the whole week with him as he went around and did conferences, and I watched him. He was 68 at the time, and he used to we did at every program he ran, he did a little introduction like you got me to do, and then he'd get everyone to do it, and then he'd say, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking. I'm 68, I've been around the block a few times. I'm going to start talking, and when you're ready to learn something, ask a question. And I kind of looked at this and thought, whoa, this is really interesting. And every 20 or 30 minutes, he'd say, look, just have a bit of a buzz, and when I come back in, you can ask me some questions. Now, I watched this for a couple of days, and because I was still in the early stages of my own educational formation, and I thought you had to have things like lesson plans and objectives and outcomes and all this stuff. So after I couldn't contain myself, after about 2 days, I said, Malcolm, how does this work? He said, you just seem to start talking and people ask. He said, when you're working with adults, he said, you've got no control over what they learn. And if they don't want to ask questions, they're not ready to learn. So I've got a lot of wisdom. I'm happy to keep talking. So that's what I do. And the buzz groups, every 20 or 30 minutes, he said that gives them the opportunity to unpack it, and for the people. And there's always questions after you give people time for a buzz.
Wow.
I said, but then every 30 minutes, oh yeah, he said, I can only go 30 minutes without a cigarette. So no, he had no overt structure to his program. It was him and the group, and if they wanted to learn, they were going to do the learning. But he wasn't going to teach them, and he had no control over their outcomes. That was a huge learning for me at the time. Absolutely huge.
Ben, you decided to leave the organization and then the corporate world also, and start your own consulting firm, right? And
Yep.
and since a lot of people also wanted to become entrepreneur, having their own organization and stuff like that, but that is scary to a lot of us also, running your own company, because in the corporations or in the public sectors, basically you have there's a comfort zone in there. You have as insurance and everything, right? So why did you decide to go solo with Sally?
Basically, I didn't fit. Originally, I was headhunted to get out of the public service. I was one of the first management consultants appointed to a company called Arthur Young, which went on to become Ernst & Young. So in the days when management consulting was getting started, I was out of the public service to go to Arthur Young, and I helped him establish a consulting division. And then after I left, then it was while I was at Ernst & Young that I decided I wanted to go out on my own. And look, the reason I did that was, I always had trouble fitting in the system. I going right back to the original, I was a precocious young person. I didn't become any less precocious as I got older. I just got ruder and blunter. And, there were, when I was in the system, some things I just wouldn't do. And they'd take me aside and give me counselling and say, you've got to, do this or do that. And we had a merger when I was at Arthur Young. Arthur Young and Ernst and Winnie got together and created Ernst and Young. And I can remember having a conversation with one of the partners, and they were putting the two consulting teams together. And I said to one of the partners, somewhat naively, I suppose, I said, well, I'm just not going to work with him. And he said, oh, but, And I just wouldn't do it. So there was a whole host of reasons, none of them need to be gone into, but I just thought I'm just not going to, some things I just won't do. So in the end, it became clear to me that I probably would be better off in another position called self-employed. That way I only had to account to myself and to Sally. You know, and the clients who paid you. Now, if they're paying you, you don't mind kind of, you know, copping a bit of flack. You know, freedom was always a big motivator for me. The notion of being free and not having, you know, I react very poorly to being controlled by anybody.
Nobody want to be in control.
Yeah, like even as a kid, you know, when I was in the Army Reserve way back, you know, when I was at university, and I had a lot of trouble in the Army, a lot of trouble. Because it's so structured and disciplined. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with the Army system. I learned a lot out of it. But I just had a lot of trouble. And part of the reason I probably wasn't successful in school systems was I just didn't fit the structured way of doing things. I had this desperate need to be free.
Ben, we have a few minutes left for this conversation. I want to go to the book that you wrote. It's Innovation in Australia and Creating Prosperity for Future Generations. Tell us, you know, what motivates you to write that book, though?
Well, two things. Firstly, I've got 4 children, as I mentioned. My older daughter, about 10 or 12 years ago, suggested to me one day that if I didn't get interested in the social media area, I'd be irrelevant. And nothing focuses your mind when your children tell you you're irrelevant. And so I said, well, you set me up a website and I'll start blogging. So I started blogging and I blogged for a little while. And it was all a bit meaningless. And I mean, a couple of friends of mine said, you know, it's a bit like writing to yourself in the mirror, isn't it? Anyway, one of our politicians came in, Malcolm Turnbull, and he was the Prime Minister, and he had a big track record in business, and he initiated this conversation in Australia about innovation. And at the time I was searching around for a lever in my blogging. What was I going to write about? You know, you couldn't just write about yourself every day. And I because I'd been involved nationally in the debates about microeconomic form in Australia back in the 80s and 90s, I had a view, rightly or wrongly, I had a view about what was happening. And not only that, I've been a bit of a hoarder. So I had papers back from 1989, 90, 91, 92, and one of them happened to be called Innovation in Australia. So I went back, and Turnbull's written this policy document, and I've gone back and got this document out, and I've just got it up here. Oh, no, I haven't. Sorry. I've gone back and read the 1990 document, and then I've read Turnbull's stuff, and I thought, they're saying the same stuff now, and it's 30 years later. So that set me off. I wanted to set off, so I had a whole series of blogs on Australia's innovation journey and the challenges. And so I had about, 60 or 70 blogs. They're on my website if you want to have a look at them all. And then someone said, because I wasn't planning to write a book, and then someone said, well, you ought to write a book. That was a real challenge. So I printed out all the blogs and had them all on the little pile, you know, that pile you keep next to your desk for those things you're going to do at some time in the future. Sat there for at least 12 months. And I thought, oh, shit, this is, you know. So on January, whenever it was, January 2019, I went on to the web and went to a thing called, one of the websites that has jobs advertised, and I looked for editor. And I had a couple of goes, but in the end I found an editor who was based in Brisbane, who'd worked for a publishing company, and I said, I had a couple of people I'd given the blogs to, and they said, yeah, no, we reckon there's a book in this. So I found this editor, and I talked to him about it, and we chatted, and he said, why don't you send them all over to me and have a look. He had a look, and so there was, I don't know, maybe 50,000, 60,000 words in blogs. And he said, yeah, I reckon we could do something. So within 6 weeks, he came back with a book. I've gone, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. And so we got the book. He said, now, this is a really good book. Don't mess it up. And you know what I did? I tried to mess it up because I wanted to make it better. That took an extra 3 months and a bit more money that I didn't need to spend. But in the end, we got the book. And, you know, it's a time in Australia's history where we've got to grapple with some big questions, and we're not doing it. That's what drove me. You know, I think the level of political debate in this country is doesn't bear speaking about. And we're essentially, you know, and there's plenty of literature around about it, we're a nation of adopters. We're not a particularly, we claim that we're really creative and we do all sorts of amazing things. But as a nation, we are a nation of adopters. We have a culture, we have a serious business culture problem with a whole range of issues. We lack imagination and foresight, and part of that's our political system, which is you know, elections every 4 years and a range of cultural things that, you know, we're a nation devoted to lifestyle, would you believe? You know, we have a whole industrial relations system in Australia, you know, which is the unions and the management systems. Every debate we've had in Australia about industrial relations is about recreation. You know, we've never had a genuinely powerful debate about wealth creation, for example, which is what business is supposed to do. So that's my passion, to shift the nature of the debate in this country from, you know, we had the most recent government came in, they did a big thing on jobs and productivity. Now, that's all really good, but it doesn't create wealth. You know, you've got to talk about the big issues, like what industries should we be working in and where are the best, you know. I just have so anyway, that's my little mission, and every now and again I publish a paper or write a book, or I'm going to write another one. And we'll just chip away at it every day. You know, I'm 73 now, so I should have another good 5 to 10 years to keep writing. So we'll see what happens.
Beautiful, man. Beautiful, Ben. So you bring the wisdom, the experience, and the inner drive to help the future generation to get prosperity. That is important. It also help them to focus on what's important for them instead of, you know, focus on things that doesn't matter, right? So Ben, I have two last questions for this conversation before we part. Okay. So the first question is, I love the way that you think, because you know, like, you always challenge for something better, and then you didn't follow rules, and you look for your own ways of doing, because you want to get things better your way, right? My wife and I, we have been on the quest to help people improve their ability to think. But I simply ask experts like you, how have you been expand your own ability to think over the years? Can you share with us your secrets?
Reading would be one. I mean, it just never stop reading. I'm a bit slower now. Look, when I actually became self-employed, I made a conscious decision then that if I was going to be self-employed where I didn't have the support of a system, I was going to have to do something to position myself differently in the world. So over the next years, I spent money going to the IMD in Switzerland, Institute of Management Development in Switzerland. I went to Wharton Business School for a week. I did a whole range of what you'd call strategic professional development interventions. I went to MIT in Boston to study entrepreneurship. And they were, if you like, centre points. The Institute of Company Directors in Australia to a lesser extent, but, you know, there's a program in Australia called, and I think it's global, called the Hoffman Quadrinity, which is if you like, a human potential spiritual development process So I did the 10 days there. So
Mm.
I've strategically invested in interventions to shake my core, if you like.
Mm.
Not to mention being married to a woman who can shake it, that is just by looking at me and saying, "Where did you get that idea from?" Uh, Sally's been a great source of inspiration for me because of her genuine happiness.
Mm.
I just look, how did you get to be like that? I'm kind of chunking out stuff all the time, and Sally's just happy. Why do you need this? So that, I've strategic. I've worked hard at. I have to say, I've worked hard to, and the community. I was national president of the professional body in training in Australia, and I got heavily involved in that. I did a lot of what you'd call community pro bono work. I worked for a congregation of religious people for 10 years on a day a month for nothing, and that shook me to the core in different ways. I got involved in professional sport in Australia, so I was a professional rugby administrator for 10 years. And finished up being on the chairman of one of the major rugby teams in Australia and on the board of Australian Rugby.
Wow.
So they were all kind of what you do to keep yourself on the edge.
Ah. Well, they reinvesting on yourself so that you're gonna continue to improve, and then a lot of reading. So that noting here. Right. So we traveled the past already. We knew what your aspiration. We knew the struggle when you were young, looking for the life direction for yourself, and then until the 25 years old, working at the department, and then you got into the training. Then you figured out, like your life purpose, right? And then that's the you into a new directions ever since. Married beautifully 47 years and continue, of course, with 4 children and then 13 grandchildren, right?
Yep.
Now, leading to the future a little bit with me, Ben. Is there anything exciting that Ben is working on he wants to share with us so that we can celebrate with him in advance?
Oh, look, approaching my elder years is a challenge, So what does it mean to be a good elder in a community? Is a question that I think a lot about.
Mm.
In our culture, maybe it's different in yours. We don't spend a lot of time respecting elders. We just put them aside and let him move on. Well, I'm not really good at being put aside. So that's a struggle for me.
Uh-huh.
What does it mean to be a good elder? What does it mean to be a good wisdom figure? How do you position yourself so that you can continue to make a difference in a way that's appropriate for your age?
Yeah.
I don't want to run anything or do anything at one level, but probably and being healthy is another big challenge. When you all of a sudden when I go for a walk, I think my hips hurt, or something. You've got to kind of keep managing yourself. So, what am I doing to focus on the future? One question that came up in my very early life, a young woman said it to me when I had a couple of burnout experiences in my very early life, and a young woman said to me once, because what's going to become of me? The world's coming to an end. I've failed. It's all. And she said, that's not the right question. The question is, who are you becoming?
Who are you becoming? Mm.
And so that's what I work on every day.
Beautiful. Wow.
Now, who am I becoming every day? And that allows me to address all those questions.
Yeah.
Can I be a better grandpa? Can I be a better husband? Can I be a better father? I've got 4 adult children who are all in their midlife,
Yeah.
And so how can you make a difference in people's lives as an elder and a wisdom figure, I guess, is the question.
Beautiful. Beautiful. If we all asking ourselves that question, right? How I become, yeah. Then you look at the world, how beautiful it will be, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
and that is very big question. Is there's a lot of us not asking ourselves every day. Wake up in the morning asking that question: What am I becoming? What person am I becoming? Right? And then we set a goal for the day to become a better father, but better brother, better son, better in-laws, better worker, and then you set the day in the right mode, and that's very
yep.
beautiful, Ben. Thanks for sharing that. All right, and. Perhaps I would love one day to meet and talk to Sally, your wife, because you say that she has the happiness, mechanism inside of her. And you look at the world, a lot of people out there cannot find happy themselves in whatever
Yeah.
that they live. So I want to pick her brain on that wisdoms, if that is okay. Can you ask her?
I
Uh,
will.
yeah,
I think that's a fabulous idea. I
yeah.
don't think she will.
Yeah, but in my line of work, I've been trained on asking, and if I'm not asking, then I definitely will have a no, right? So if now you ask her and use
I'll
your
ask. Yeah.
yeah, so
No,
ask her for us, please, and then just a short conversation for her to share, the wisdom that she can keep the family intact, and having a happy life, and a lot of that will advice from her will be benefiting for a lot of people out there. So,
to me, she's been an amazing mate.
hmm.
And I wrote a blog on it actually. One of my last blogs. If you look up the website about everybody needs a mate.
Ah.
And she's been amazing, mate. She's a fabulous mother and even better grandmother. I mean, you should see her buying presents. It's on all year. Just little presents for all of the grandkids, and it just goes on, and she just has a way about her that is disarming and disciplining.
Yeah. Ben, it's been a pleasure to knowing you. It's been a pleasure
Yeah.
to have a conversation with you today. We learn a lot from this. And I want to say thank you for being so generous to spend your time to join the show and share your insights, your stories with our audience. I wish you well. Please send our love to Sally and to your children and grandchildren, and enjoy the holiday season there. All right.
And you too. It's been a great privilege to do this. I was asked you about, can I circulate? I'm certainly going to circulate it to my family when I see it. It'll be lovely, and I think it's a great testimony to your work actually. So it's a great gift. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a great.
Have a wonderful day, and we meet one day. All right.
We will for sure. Cheers. Bye
Cheers.
bye.
Bye bye, my friend.